You ready? Let's do this. Welcome back, everyone, to the GROklahoma podcast. This is Mo, and today's episode, we're thrilled to have Dr. Natasha Bray. She is a distinguished professional and the OSU, Oklahoma State University College of Osteopathic Medicine Campus Dean at the Cherokee Nation in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. She has a background in internal medicine, addiction medicine, and a strong commitment to medical education. Dr. Bray has been a driving force in advocating for vulnerable populations and improving healthcare access. Today, we explore her journey, advocacy efforts, and just insights into health equity, research, mentoring, network opportunities, and inclusivity in medical education. Please join us in welcoming Dr. Natasha Bray to the studio.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you.
Thank you. And a special thank you to people who suggested you, especially Mac Dosha. So let's start from the beginning. Can you share your upbringing and early life experiences? I'm also very curious to know if there were any personal experiences that must have influenced your current career path.
Yeah, so I was very lucky growing up. I grew up in Oklahoma. I was born in Tulsa, where my dad was a first-year medical student, and my father was a family medicine physician. He had a private practice in Enid, Oklahoma, where my mom was his nurse and practice administrator. So from a very early age, I was around medicine. And I think that that was really critical to my formation and to my passions. I saw patients come in and out of his office. I saw people who had the ability to pay for their health care, and I saw people who would have to bring in barter to care for their health care. So farmers who maybe had slaughtered a cow and would bring us a side of beef to be able to make sure that their wife was cared for and able to deliver a baby in a safe environment. And so I think that upbringing was very privileged in a lot of ways, because it gave me a deep sense of service to our community, a deep sense of we all come to healthcare and come to life with different experiences, and being present and hearing and listening to the needs of your community is critical to addressing their healthcare needs.
I love that. We all come to life with different experiences. The good old days of paying your healthcare bills with crates of eggs and slices of beef. I don't think my physician will like that form of payment these days, but thank you for sharing that. Can you tell us what you do right now in simple terms? How would you describe what you do to a fifth grader, for example?
So to a fifth grader, I would probably tell them I'm very similar to their principal or their headmaster at their school. So the headmaster takes care of the teachers, makes sure that they have the resources that they need to educate them, and is really there as an advocate for the students. What are the students' needs? How are they in that learning environment? How do we advocate to get resources that are needed to allow each of our students to be successful? It's a great job, and there's behind the scenes things. There's important accreditation things to make sure that we're meeting quality standards that are needed to educate people to be physicians. But at the end of the day, we're just teachers, and we're here to support the learning needs of our learners, support the teaching needs of our faculty and staff, and ensure that we're in an environment that really allows people to dream their dreams, experience and learn the things that they need to be successful in going out and impacting the community, whatever that means for each individual.
Thank you for that. Can you walk us through a day in the life of a dean, especially for a College of Medicine? What does that entail?
Yeah, so there's no normal day. I think that's the first thing, is anybody who thinks that they're going to have predictability to the day. I come in each day with a to-do list, usually of 15 to 20 things. And then at the end of the day, I'm really excited if I've crossed 5 of them off. I see my primary job as being an advocate. I'm here to solve problems. So whether that's a student's problem that's impacting what happens in their ability to engage in education, whether that's a faculty's problem in figuring out how to deliver course material, or work with the students to be able to be inspiring and to mentor them to the success. That's what my job mostly is. I do a lot of meetings. These days, those are mostly, video web-based meetings to really think about from a policy standpoint, how do we continue to create learning environments that meet our mission, meet the learning needs of our students, and support a healthy environment.
Okay. Thank you for that. And I think I probably jumped the gun. Can you just walk us through your education path, especially from wherever you got started to your current role right now as a dean?
Yeah. So, as I said, I grew up in Oklahoma. I grew up in Enid. I went to a little Montessori school called Cimarron in Enid, Oklahoma, and it's still there. So started life in a Montessori-based education that I actually had through 6th grade. Then went to Chisholm, which is a public school system there in Enid. From there, I actually went to Oklahoma City and went to the Oklahoma School of Science and Mathematics. So it's a magnet high school for juniors and seniors. So I graduated in their 4th class in 1995, and that was really an important experience for me for a couple of reasons. One, I was really into science and math, so being able to be in an environment that fostered that and supported that was really important. Probably the more important thing, though, is I actually met my husband. So he was also a student there and was from the opposite side of the state. He was from a little town called Muldrow, Oklahoma, which is in Sequoyah County in this kind of south central part of Oklahoma. And that was 30 years ago, is about now. So really from a career standpoint and a personal and professional growth, that was really important. But that school was important to me because I learned that, one, I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. And that sounds like such a silly lesson, but there are lots of really smart people in the world. But the difference is whether or not you have a passion and you're supported in being successful by mentors and by people around you, and you put in a lot of really hard work. And I think that those are easy things. You can waste talent if you don't put in work, but talent doesn't flourish and develop if there's not mentors, if there's not people who are supporting all the little sacrifices that happen to make someone successful. And so those were important lessons. And I was lucky enough to learn that as a junior and senior in high school. I think a lot of people don't get that work ethic and that strive and that support and the realization and insight into it until much later in their educational journey. So from there, I went to the University of Tulsa. I was a biology major with a few minors added on there, which I love the University of Tulsa. I think it's a great educational institution in Oklahoma, really supportive. And then went to Oklahoma State, where I did my College of Osteopathic Medicine and got my medical degree. I'm an internist by training. So for those of you who want that, and you touched on that, and really, I love patient care. And so it's funny that I ended up in education, but it all kind of happened by accident. I wanted to have a baby and start my family with my husband, so I took a teaching position, and that was 20-something years ago, and I would not change a single thing, because the ability to be able to engage in education and still take care of patients is such a wonderful gift.
Thank you for sharing that. I think a follow-up question to that would be, especially for moms who might be finding it very hard to make those pivots, trying to balance career and family planning. What kind of nuggets could you pass along to them?
There's no right time to start a family. I think we live in an Instagram kind of world where you see perfect snapshots and pictures and think, oh, they have it figured out and they've got it together and everything's working for them. That's just not the reality. being a mom is the hardest job you will ever have. And at the same time, it's the most rewarding job. But at some point, you have to kind of step back and say, what's important to me? Where do I see myself? How does this fit into my life? And it's wonderful to have kids. And for some people, that's early in their educational journey and adulthood. Some people, that's later. My first son wasn't born until I was 33, and my second one when I was 35. So I'm definitely the old mom, and that comes with some challenges to it, to be perfectly honest. But being a young mom's hard. So I don't know that there's a perfect place. I think being honest about what your support structure is really, really important. None of us can do this alone. So what does support look like? How do you do it? What is okay just letting it get by? There's going to be days that good enough is good enough. And then just appreciate each day and each gift you have with your child and in your work and in your profession, and grant yourself grace, because we all make mistakes every day. It's not always the perfect snapshot, Polaroid, Instagram day. There's lots of days that are messy and dirty and disorganized and disruptive, but they all have their own hidden blessing in them.
Thank you for that. And I think it goes back to your previous point of how you can be talented, but that won't flourish unless you almost like ensconce yourself in the midst of people that can bring that out of you. And so you're talking about support system and making sure you lean into your community of support as a parent. I think that's a very consistent framework. So thanks for that reminder. I mean, you've accomplished a lot of things, but I can imagine that it's not been a walk in the park. Can you share some of just your major challenges when it comes to your career and how you've been able to overcome, hopefully, those obstacles, and what strategies you employed in overcoming them?
So I just mentioned grace, and I think that that's a really important thing. We all want things to be easy, and we all want things to go our way. One of the hardest things for me was figuring out what I wanted to do in medicine, and what that journey looked like. Where did I fit in as I started thinking about residency programs and where I wanted to go? And, this was early 2000s, and you would want to think that women were widely accepted in medicine in that point in time, but they weren't. There were surgical specialties where being a woman was really not acceptable. I had one surgery rotation where I really was interested in going to the residency program, and the program director told me that he thought all females should have to have hysterectomies before pursuing surgical training, because it wasn't acceptable to take that training away from someone else if you were going to become a mother and be distracted in your career. And that's really disheartening. It's almost soul crushing, because two things happen. One, this is someone who's really well respected. So is what they're saying true? And you begin to question if that's the right thing and whether or not your contribution is going to be meaningful. At the same time, you're still trying to figure out if it's really what you want to do. And is this where your passions lie? So I think sometimes we make decisions based on what others expect of us. And that's good sometimes. That can help us through their guiding process. People see in us talents that we may not see in ourselves. It also can be really bad, because it will limit us from pursuing things that we care about deeply. So I think being honest with yourself, granting yourself grace that you're going to make mistakes. I started out when I graduated medical school, I was going to be an otolaryngologist, so an ENT surgeon, and very quickly into my residency training realized that I was a much better internist. That I had kind of missed the boat on figuring that journey out for myself. And I was willing to step back and pivot and change residency programs, change cities where I was training, so that I was positioned to better align what my goals were and what my professional needs were with where my talents were and where my passions were.
Well, thank you for that. Again, cycling back to the concept of grace. We had a guest on the show, Dr. Natasha, not Bray, Michael, and she talked about how there's almost like, okay, we know from statistics, we have underrepresented minorities as deans in the U.S. And even on top of that is we don't have a lot of female deans, right? I think based on the last stat I saw, and probably about 2019, which is a little bit ago, I think it was about 18% of deans were women. What do you think are the issues with this? And because I imagine it's not really been quite easy for you getting where you are today. And how can we ensure that we're having a balanced representation of not just women, but also underrepresented minorities when it comes to deanship in medicine?
Yeah, so I think one of the challenges that we see is a very practical one, right? Women, whether we want to admit it or not, are the primary caregivers for most families. So when it comes to having children and it comes to caring for elderly and aging parents and it comes to caring for the family, women continue to be the primary occupant in that role within family dynamics. And that does a few things to the work-life balance that's happening. You cannot do everything and you cannot be everywhere. So if you are devoting time and energy to a very critical and important task of caring for children, caring for your family members, caring for your family and home needs, that takes attention away from research and publication and career advancement. There's only so many hours in a day. So I think we have to step back. And I think it impacts minorities. If we look at a lot of our minorities who have stepped into medicine and been so successful, a lot of times they're first generation. They're the first person in their family who is stepping into that role. So there's not family support to understanding the competing demands that are there. We see that for women as well. And these are generalizations. So not everyone has the same experience. So I don't mean to imply that. But when we talk about what those barriers are, if we don't begin to recognize that when a woman has a baby and takes maternity leave and steps out and then steps back into research, into their career, into the profession, that was, it's a time gap. It's something that happened, but that experience, that knowledge, that skill that they developed in a different arena is actually really critically important to their success as a leader and as an educator. So we have to recognize that and we have to name that and we have to give credit to that. The other challenge that we see, I think, that affects both women and minorities is they get pulled to do things that aren't academically rewarded. They're pulled to do things like chair DEI initiatives and task force. They're pulled into mentoring roles because having a shared experience is so important to mentorship. And so they start doing things that then take very real time away from other tasks that are more recognized in the traditional medical hierarchy of being of value. So again, we have to name those critically important things. Our academic learning environments would not exist if we did not have people who were mentoring our students, who were not ensuring that they were engaged and that we didn't have attrition, that didn't make people feel that they belonged and were part of the learning environment. So we have to name and reward that behavior and those skills, that contribution and that knowledge, and recognize that that needs and must go into promotion and how we begin to pull people in and reward what's happening for their academic success, their career advancement. And as we do that, now all of a sudden people aren't saying, well, they're in that role because they're a minority, or they're in that role because we needed to check a box and we needed a woman. They're in that role because they were absolutely critical in their contribution to the success of the educational environment and to the success of students in the mission of training our students to serve our mission and our communities.
Wow. I mean, you've talked about just two main contextual factors. Definitely the intrinsic value as women as primary caregivers, and then being nurturers, as for the most part, we are pulled to do things that are not academically rewarding. And even though this thing helps shape the future of medicine as a way, because we're pouring so much into others, they are not tangible enough to be recognized and bear their weight in gold for you to be considered for lofty positions like deanship. And I've never really had anyone explain it that way before. So thank you for that. I guess the challenge there is for those in power to really recognize what these issues are, because we need to have that balanced representation when it comes to leadership in medicine.
100%. And that's part of all of our job, right? Is to name those opportunities and those contributions that haven't been named and measured and appreciated in the past.
Yeah. Thank you. I can sense that you're very passionate about medical education. But I'm curious to know, what changes do you anticipate in the next decade as far as evolutionary changes, and how do we best prepare both current and future medical students for this shift?
So I think one of the really exciting things that happened coming out of COVID is it forced a paradigm shift. Historically, medical education has been a time-based experience. We put people in a classroom all together and expect them to learn and develop in the same way, at the same rate. And if they don't, we label them as being, not smart enough to be a doctor, rather than recognizing that our different talents and different experiences have us approach the learning environment different. With COVID, when we were forced to really evaluate what is critical for medical students to learn, what is critical for skills development, we actually had an opportunity to really see some exciting things happen, because we saw students who were having to step away from their medical education because of other family obligations, because they got quarantined, because they had their own personal health issues, or because of the health of the communities, and we weren't able to continue to give and deliver medical education the way that we historically have. And what we learned is we began to kind of parse apart what it really means to approach educationally different. We've talked about for a long time different learning styles, but we would recognize that someone learned differently, but we had no tools to be able to help them be successful in engaging. We said, yeah, you learn a little bit different, but this is how we're going to deliver education to you, and you've got to adapt your learning style to us.
Yeah.
I think with COVID, we began to understand that we actually can change how we deliver medical education. We can adapt how we teach to the learning needs of individual students. So in the same way we talk about patient-centered care, and that's become kind of a buzzword on how we should be delivering and adapting the care of an individual, I think we have to begin to apply those lessons into our educational and our learning environment. So how do we adapt the information? It doesn't mean we don't ensure competency. We don't have outcomes that we assess and that we hold students to, but how do we adapt the learning environment to support the student through their educational journey? And that may look different for different students.
Thank you for that. I think it goes back to one of your strong points of inclusive education, because historically, yes, we've all been, the way medicine has been taught has been very traditional. But you're right. I think with the paradigm shift that we saw with COVID, I think the onus is on those in the arms of power to be able to recognize that we all have different ways of learning. How do we make sure that we are bringing out the best in people? Again, going back to flourishing and the support system that they need in place. So thank you for that reminder. So you're involved in research as well, and specifically health equity research. Could you share a notable project or initiative and what you went about in addressing health disparities? And if there are any lessons you also learned from that experience as well?
I think it goes to the importance of asking a question. Traditionally in most of our medical research, most of our behavioral-based studies, we make an assumption that all people have the same lived experience. And that translates into how study design is done and the impact. that then the results have on different communities. And we know in reality that's different. If I present to the emergency room with chest pain versus another individual who presents with that exact same presentation, but they're a different gender or they're a different race, what happens to that individual as they move through the medical system looks very different. That may be because of the words we use to describe, and that can be impacted by our education level. It may be impacted by our religion or our culture and how pain and healthcare, illness and wellness are perceived and impacted by our religion. It may be impacted by our socioeconomic status and whether or not we are in a highly affluent environment, healthcare environment, or we're in a free clinic somewhere. But we know those different things, and it may be impacted by our language. Can we speak the language? All influence what happens to that patient. And until we begin to have conversations about that and really look into how do people move into our healthcare system, what does healthcare really mean? Is it just the outcomes of their diagnoses and the treatment that they receive, or is it about their quality of life, their ability to do the things that they value within their communities? We really don't have an understanding. So a lot of my work really is driven by students, to be honest, and what are their interests and how do we support them in developing their passions. So I try to set back and let them lean into, but we really want to examine some of those challenges, recognizing that every person brings a different experience into the healthcare environment, and they have different values and outcomes. What is a good outcome is going to look different to them based on those values and on their previous experiences. And how do we begin to ask questions about population health? Why is it that our life expectancy is determined by the zip code in which we're born? That's not just healthcare, that's education, that's socioeconomic, that's community exposure from a very early age, that's access to healthy fruits and vegetables. There's so many pieces that go into it. But if we're not asking the questions and we're not exploring that, then are we really looking towards ensuring that every person, our neighbors, our family members, ourselves, our friends, our communities, have the opportunity to pursue health and have the opportunity to live what they see as being their best life. And that's really important to us.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Especially you emphasizing patient-centered care and how research can contribute to creating healthcare systems that prioritize the needs of diverse patient populations. Love that. Let's segue a little bit into mentoring. As you know, this is very crucial, especially in medical education. What would you say, in your opinion, are qualities that make a mentor effective? And how do you approach mentoring to empower the next generation of healthcare professionals?
Mentoring is such an interesting thing because there's a cross between mentoring, between coaching, and just being a friend and being a source of support that I think gets very, very messy. And I like the messiness. I think we need to lean into that messiness because it's really important. Mentorship to me is about listening and hearing the goals of the individual, but sometimes their goals need a little bit of refinement. Maybe they're not seeing the potential that's in themselves. They lack confidence, and we need to really be willing to lean into that coach role and say, man, I noticed you do this outstanding. Have you thought about? So planting seeds for people to think about something that they never even considered. It's being willing to say, I know that this is your passion. But right now, today, you don't have the skills to be successful in that. So how do we think about developing those skills? And are the sacrifices that you're gonna make? Because everything in life is about choices. We can't do everything. So are the sacrifices you're gonna make to develop those skills worth what you're going to achieve in the end? Is that important? And having those honest conversations is really critical to mentoring. And then I think probably the part that's so messy is you have to be willing to be vulnerable with yourself.
Yeah.
Students and learners look to you as if everything happened in this wonderful, very direct pathway. And being able to share that, I made a mistake. I thought I wanted to do this. And I didn't realize that really why I liked that meant I was better to do this, and to own those mistakes, own the vulnerability associated with a developmental journey, which has 2 steps forward, 1 step back, maybe 100 steps back.
100
at some point. But finding the ability to keep moving forward in the passion and the interest, and to be able to admit when you're wrong and celebrate success, even if it's just little bitty ones along the pathway. And I think when you do that, you really are genuinely investing in someone, whoever that person is, in investing in their success, and investing in them finding their identity in their journey and how they're going to contribute. And that is such an amazing gift. That is one of the most rewarding things that I do, is seeing people find their passion, find what they're good at, feel good and confident about who they are, because that is just such a powerful, amazing thing.
Thank you. Especially the point of just, being vulnerable, and mentoring is messy, and just taking that and being okay with that as well. On the flip side, what would you say would make someone an effective mentee, right? And I know that as women, we have probably been over-mentored and under-sponsored, and we can, talk a little bit about those nuances. But from a mentee's perspective, how can we utilize this opportunity to be mentored by people? How can we be effective as a mentee?
I think asking hard questions and being willing to hear something that you don't like or doesn't feel good or feels uncomfortable. No one wants to hurt anyone's feelings, right? We want to build people up and not have honest conversations. But as a mentee, if you really are going to grow, you need to understand what are things that you need to work on, because we tend to have blind spots in ourselves, and recognizing those blind spots. And that's not that we criticize or that we, pick on people or bully them because they can't do something. It's being willing to hear, this is something I need to work on. One of the most powerful things that ever happened to me was when I was a resident. I asked an intern who was on my team if they were doing okay on rounds in front of a group of individuals. They looked tired, they looked stressed, they looked overwhelmed, on the point of tears. And I looked at them and I said, "Are you okay? Do you need to step away for a moment?" For me, that was demonstrating empathy. That was being kind. That was being responsive to an observed behavior that I saw in the environment. My attending after rounds pulled me aside and said how disappointed that they were in what I had done. And I was shocked. I was angry. I was frustrated. I did not understand why what I did was wrong. And by the time we had finished that conversation, they gave me the feedback that that person was clearly struggling, and that it was right for me to pause and create space to figure out. But by doing that in front of other people, I called out their vulnerability. I called out and identified and labeled that they were not in a place that was allowing them to be okay in that moment, and that took away their defense mechanism and their ability to cope. And for some people that's okay, but for a lot of people that's not. We just need to keep it together in the moment and get through what we're doing so that we can move forward and accomplish other things and process things in private as we need to. I had never, in my entire life experience, I was probably 26 at the time, ever understood or thought or even could understand that expressing empathy and support and concern for someone could actually be disruptive to them. Really important.
Right. I was going to ask how that was, what the reception was like on the other side. But yeah. Thank you for that. That must have been quite an ordeal. From your experience as a mentor, can you share just some moments that stood out for you? Because I imagine those are things that keep you going, right?
Oh, it's amazing. Probably some of the best is I had a medical student probably about 15 years ago who really kind of struggled, was a mom, wasn't sure where her place was, came to us as a residence when I was a internal medicine program director. And she was an outstanding educator. I mean, her ability to sit down with medical students, even as a resident, and help them understand complex things, her ability to talk to patients and meet them where they were and help them understand what was happening both from a health standpoint, what's happening with the disease process, but also from a system standpoint, what's happening within that crazy hospital system where everything doesn't seem to make sense, was just outstanding. And she didn't have confidence in what she was doing. She wasn't sure about where her career was going to take her. I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, so about 5 years after she'd finished her residency, she became an internal medicine program director. And she still is to this day. That is one of the, those amazing things, because I know those skills and talents that she had that she didn't feel confident in. She uses absolutely every day. Her ability to make people feel welcome, her ability to make people feel that they have control, her ability to explain complex things in a way that supports growth and education is being used every day to benefit residents and students and patients. Those are the things that really make you proud. So those are kind of the big things. The small things are being the first to know that a student is pregnant or that they're starting a family, because they trust you with that information enough to come and ask, how do I make all of this work? And seeing them be successful, seeing them navigating being a new mom and challenges around breastfeeding and managing their medical education and doing it with outstanding talent and grace and success is so.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that heartwarming experience. And it's good to hear they're doing great things in their own space as well. Let's talk a little bit about networking. We know it's been emphasized for professional growth, for women especially. And I'm picking on women because we know we need a lot of help in that area, especially for those that might not be very forthcoming. How can we, for those that are looking to build meaningful connections, how can they get started with that? Because that's so important for professional growth.
I think the first is we have to set aside our shyness, our insecurity, our imposter syndrome, all of those words that we use to label that lack of self-awareness of how talented we are. And then you start reaching out. What's the worst thing somebody says? I don't have time to talk to you right now. I think you won't find that. Medicine, probably 95% of the time, and I'm never going to say 100% because there's people that just aren't nice everywhere. But I think 95% of the time, people are willing to listen. They want to hear your story. They want to see your success, and they want to help you. So the hard part is, the random student who hasn't got into medical school who I get a message on Instagram from. I can't help them directly, but I can get them to the right people who can help them from an education. How do we go about process? What resources do we have to support them in applying to medical school? But that took a lot of bravery for that person to send me a random message on Instagram, right? So don't be afraid to reach out to people. We tend in our minds to build them up as being these really important people that are on pedestals. The reality is they get up, they have good days, they have bad days, they've had successes, they've had failures. Reach out, talk to them. If they aren't helpful to you, no big deal, find somebody else. But I think that willingness to put yourself out there is so critically important. The flip side is as that's happening, genuinely be invested in helping people. If someone reaches out to me and is interested in a committee, I'm going to make sure that I follow up on that, because that's what I would want someone to do for me. So I'm going to make the phone call. I'm going to get them to the right person that can help them with whatever that application process is. I can't do the application process. I usually have no control over what the application process is. But if I can connect them to someone else that I know who can help them, what a wonderful gift to advance that person. So being willing to do that and really seeing that as part of our responsibility, I think is important. We have to help each other.
Yeah. I think it goes back to, I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson who said this, that it's one of the most beautiful compensations of life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping themselves. So thank you for that reminder too. As we're trying to build our network, being genuinely invested in the lives of others. And that way it keeps everything going in motion and the world becomes a better place.
Yeah, it's a wonderful gift.
Yeah. I probably know the answer to this question because you've hinted at it, but I would just like to still tease it out. You wear so many hats, wife, mom, dean, academic, researcher. What strategies or practices have you found particularly effective in maintaining a healthy work-life balance or integration or whatever the lingo is these days?
Giving up the concept that it actually exists, right? I think we get told as we're coming through our education of there's some magical place where everything falls into place and you don't have to think about it. You have to think about it. So do things that help organize you. Think about what's important to you. Is it important to you to do the load of laundry and make sure it's folded? Or is it important to you to sit by your child and read them a bedtime story? Be willing to ask for help when you need it. We cannot do everything. So what between you and your partner, what works for that? What can you do? How do you approach the team aspect of managing a home and a family and all of those things, whether it's cooking or cleaning or grocery shopping, and then be willing to say, you know what? We need help in this area. That was a hard one for me, was to realize that I can't be everywhere and do everything. So having somebody who can pick the kids up at school or who can help you with something, we're fortunate to be financially in a place that we can do that. But even if we can't financially, we lean into our community a lot. Where are our family members and how do we support them in their needs and their family challenges, but also how do they support us? And that looks different for every person. Some people that's family, some people that's being able to hire someone, some people that's their church community, but finding where those supports are in your infrastructure and really pouring yourself into developing those because they're going to support you in success, I think is really, really important. And then I keep going back to this concept of grace. But grace is really important because some days good enough is good enough. And we're not going to be perfect at everything. We're going to make mistakes and being comfortable with that. There's going to be a day you're late to pick your kids up. It happens. They'll be fine. It's a learning opportunity for them to know how hard it is to juggle life.
I love how grace just keeps coming up in so many of your responses. And yeah, so that's so spot on. I remember when I was in grad school and I tend to have this, type A perfectionistic tendencies. And if everything wasn't 100%, it just wasn't perfect. And then my advisor called me aside because it came to a point where I couldn't even write anymore because, I felt like I wasn't doing great. And she goes, you're so highly strung that even your 60% is still good enough. So not everything has to have your 100%. And that really set me free. I still struggle here and there once in a while, but I always still remember what she told me. Like, your 60% can still be quite good enough to just make you pass on. Not everything requires 100%. So I'm really thankful that you brought that up again. And hopefully that will resonate to some of our listeners today.
I think it gives you important permission too. If you don't have to be 100% perfect at everything you do, you are willing to take risks and try new things. And that is so critically important to our own well-being and happiness and growth. So the willingness to just be terrible at something is okay, because how do you find out? How do you grow? We don't tell a kid that falls off their bike, you're terrible, never try that again. We tell them to get back on and keep trying. And that's so important for us and for our own well-being and happiness.
That's so true. Because we miss out on so many opportunities that we don't give ourselves the permission to try. And especially when we know that, I'm not perfect at it. That's okay. Just give it a try because you never know. You just never know. in your opinion, when it comes to the work you do and the research you do, especially the commitment you have to students, what are some of the key research questions we should be exploring?
I think we have to, I really think we have to step back and ask what impacts health, and what impacts the well-being of communities, is really critical. New treatments, new treatment modalities or processes are important, and we have to have innovation and we have to continue to have growth, because we know we're going to have antibiotic resistance and we need that next antibiotic that's out there. But if we really want to think about how we create healthy communities, I think we really have to step back and say, what goes into life expectancy? What goes into quality of life? And is quantity of life more important than quality of life? Well, that's an individual question, right? That gets into a lot of things that are probably beyond the scope of most research. But understanding how do we create opportunities for people, regardless of who they are, where they're from, their educational level, their ethnic, racial background, their socioeconomic status, whether they live in a rural community or an urban community. How do we begin to affect their quantity and quality of life in a meaningful way? And I think a lot of that is not what's happening in the office between a physician and a patient. I think a lot of those things are driven by what's happening in the kindergarten classrooms, and how are we creating educational opportunities within our communities? How are we creating walkable communities that encourage physical activity throughout the day in a safe and meaningful way, so that we have bodies that are in motion? How do we ensure that we have a sustainable and safe food source and food supply? Because we know highly stable shelf product foods probably are not promoting health and wellness, and maybe contributing long-term to the development of our obesity challenges, heart disease, and diabetes. So going back and asking some of those critical questions really have the potential to have long-term impact. And that looks different for each of us and each of us as researchers, because where we are in that pathway becomes important. But even if we're designing a study that is looking at one chemical pathway from a biochemical standpoint in a lab, asking the questions of how are we being inclusive and who's included in our sample population? Are we ensuring that we're getting these samples to analyze from people who are from different backgrounds, that are of different ages, that have had different lived experiences? Because we know epigenetics is so critical to turning on and turning off pathways and genes at this point. And that's how we each in our work and in our different scope begin to address these important questions. We can't limit our studies to just one little population of individuals because it's easier.
Thank you for that. We're rounding off now, and I have just a couple of questions. Now, the very next one I have been dying to ask a guest, and I believe that you might just be the right person to ask, given the authority you have and also your current position. So we know recently the governor of our state, he issued an executive order emphasizing equal opportunity and merit over diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. How do you believe this shift will impact medical education, especially given one of the things you're very passionate about is inclusive medical education?
So I think we make an assumption, and I think that there's an assumption both in your question and what we're seeing in a lot of movements. And the assumption is that merit and equal opportunity is separate and removed and different from diversity, equity, and inclusions. And I think that that's a wrong assumption, because when we're talking about in my sphere, in training future physicians, there are some things that we know. Every single student who comes into our learning environment, regardless of what their background is or their experience, is a highly intelligent, highly successful, highly accomplished individual. They have made it through the educational pathway to be at the point to apply to medical school. And by the nature of who they are, that defines them as being successful. So I don't want to say I don't care what their individual attributes are because I care deeply. But to imply that their individual attributes, whatever those are the thing that qualified them to be there is fundamentally untrue. What qualified them to be there is their intellect, their success, the work that they have done, the engagement that they have demonstrated throughout their educational journey. So to set these dichotomies up, I don't think is correct. I think we have to begin to ask questions, though, of why does it seem that people from certain groups have had opportunities across the course of their education, talking from early childhood education all the way through college, that gave them the ability to be better prepared to start medical school than someone else? And how do we begin to allow people the opportunity to get those incremental steps that they have across their educational journey to position them to be successful? I think lots of people can be doctors that don't become doctors. There are so many talented individuals out there who have the knowledge and the critical reasoning skills, the passion, the kindness, the service-oriented heart that's really needed to be an outstanding physician. But some of them aren't ready to be successful in medical school. So the question is how do we help them develop the skills that they need to be successful within the medical educational environment? And I think that that's where our opportunity and our challenge is. But if we aren't creating physicians who are dedicated to serving communities, we won't begin to address the healthcare needs of those communities. And part of that is bringing people in who have had different experiences, helping them so that we can have honest conversations about where are our blind spots. We all have blind spots. What are we not seeing? Do we understand how difficult it is for someone in a wheelchair to get into our clinic, get through the healthcare system? What are their experiences? Because we need to address those experiences. And I think that that's where the value of different lived experiences really comes from, is helping us understand what are we seeing, what are we not seeing, how do we partner to serve communities. Our goal, our mission is to train primary care physicians for rural and underserved Oklahoma. We want to have physicians that serve every single individual who lives in the state of Oklahoma. And some of them will go outside of Oklahoma, and that's wonderful too. But we want physicians who are prepared to hear and to listen and to be present and to address the healthcare needs of every citizen. And I think that as long as we focus on that mission, we continue to do the work that's so critically important.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you so much. I had a follow-up question to that, but you already answered it, which was to ask you about considerations that institutions and educators can consider as they navigate this shifts in policies. But you've answered it, and I really loved your response, and how we shouldn't do that false equivalency and saying that those two things are different, like merit and DEI, and but thinking about what it means to be human and how our lived experiences might be so different, but then how do we make sure that we are ensuring equity across the board? So thank you. As we wind down, this is going to be a little bit of a fun question. If you could teach a medical concept using interpretive dance, which concept would it be, and can you give us a sneak peek of the dance moves?
I am not a dancer, so that may be a little bit hard. I think if I was going to go with interpretive dance, I would probably go with syncope, right? Because then I could just immediately fall down and hope somebody comes and helps me get up. That's a fun question, right? Because patients experience symptoms and symptomatology in such diverse ways, and allowing this concept of really thinking about anchoring expressive movement to the concept of how patients present and the symptoms that they have and the experience that they're having, which a lot of times is really hard to articulate. They know that there's something wrong, but don't know how to label it. and help us understand it. So I loved the question. I'm not sure that you're going to get me up dancing because that's probably not my strength. But I do think it represents really an important symbolism, whether we're using dance or we're using art or we're using storytelling. I think those are all powerful tools that begin to help us understand how people view and interpret their experiences and what's happening to their body and what their desire is for health and wellness.
Yeah. Thank you. You answered it so well. And the dance will have been very tricky because I will have to interpret it because this is going to be an audio only broadcast. As we wrap up the episode, if you could leave a question for the next guest without knowing who they are or what their topic is going to be, what's a burning question you'd like to leave for the next guest? And I will make sure to ask them that.
My guest for everyone in Oklahoma is, how do we rebuild communities so that we're meeting the healthcare needs of our friends, families, and neighbors? And I think each of us approach that differently.
I love that. So how do we rebuild communities so we are meeting the healthcare needs of our friends and neighbors? Thank you so much. This has been such a wonderful time with you today, Dr. Bray. I've learned a lot from you for we've made me reflect on diverse insights and, the pace of patient care to the importance of support for learning needs and, taking us through your journey for advocating for patients to fostering talent in diverse communities. And as a mom, you've reminded us that there's never a perfect time for anything, but embracing each day and granting ourselves grace is essential. We've also looked at, the broader landscape about how disparities persist in academic leadership with, underrepresented minors and minorities and females, and what those significant barriers are from being pulled to doing other things and the time taken away to plan our families, and then learning more about the paradigm shift in medical education and how there's a need for flexibility and recognizing different learning styles. But amidst all of that, your cornerstone remains mentoring, even though it can be quite messy, but reminding mentees to ask those tough questions, to embrace the discomfort that leads to growth, and remembering that it's okay to be terrible at new things and to always keep challenging that concept of perfection. And finally, on a global level, is to understanding the factors that impact both health and community well-being, and asking ourselves, how can we rebuild these communities? How can we ensure that we are not just being blindsided to how our lived experiences are so different? I just want to say thank you so much. This was a very, very rich episode, and I appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the work that you all are doing to give voice to the community.
Thank you. Yes. I hope you have a great day.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right, bye. All right, everyone. That was the GROklahoma podcast. I've been fed today. This was a very rich episode. We hope you enjoyed it as well. If you would love to feature on the podcast, we'd love to have you. Please send us an email on GROklahoma podcast@ouhsc.edu. We are on Podbean and other major platforms where you get your podcast. And as always, I remain your host. Catch you in another episode of the GROklahoma podcast. Stay curious, everyone, and bye-bye.